Chapter 21. It wasn't long before Issachar understood Gavi's look. The huge doors opened up to a long room, flanked with pillars made of the same white stone as the rest of the building. The tops of the pillars disappeared into the ceiling, far above where Issachar stood. Her first impression of the room was light and color. Tall, arched windows lined the walls. Fabric and tapestries hung from every available surface. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating a large table on a raised platform at the farthest end of the room. 2 men and 2 women stood around the table, animatedly discussing something in front of them. Both men and one of the women had rich black skin. The second woman was white. All 4 wore long, colorful robes with embroidery that sparkled in the light from the windows. The scene was rich and beautiful, and Issachar drew in her shoulders, transfixed and nervous at the same time. The people looked up as Issachar and the others came nearer. One of the men, who wore a thin silver circlet around his head, turned to them with his hands outstretched. "Jabari, Gavi, welcome back, sons of my heart." Both Jabari and Gavi put hands over their hearts and bowed from the waist. "Our hearts have come home, father and mother, elders of our land," they said. The man grinned and walked down the steps to clasp Jabari in a firm hug. Then he moved to Gavi and hugged him. The other 3 people walked to join in, leaving their papers on the table behind them. "Wait," Ben said to Issachar. "Did he mean sons as in figurative sons or real sons?" Issachar shook her head, frowning. She felt heavy and confused. This must be the regent. And if Jabari and Gavi were his sons, well, they were like princes, weren't they? And brothers? They had never said they were brothers. She looked at Benim and Iba, and they stared back at her, wide-eyed. She felt sick to her stomach, as though the room had turned upside down. The camaraderie of the last days evaporated in the rich, scented air of the palace. The tall, elegant people finished with hugging and kissing the 2 boys. Issachar felt shabby and dirty in her traveling clothes. When Gavi looked at her, she glared at him. He came close. "Jabari didn't want to tell you," he said. "I had to respect that." "So you thought you'd spring it on us now?" she hissed at him. Jabari spoke to the robed people, who stared at Issachar and her siblings with curiosity. The one who had called Jabari and Gavi sons opened his mouth to say something, but just then the Othra swooped into the large room, bringing breezes of peace with them. Issachar had never been with the Othra in a closed space, and as they flew past the guards and through the columns, she was full of wonder at the way feelings of well-being reflected off every surface. She straightened her back as Nirol and Ifir settled at her feet, and Emil landed a foot or 2 ahead of Benim. Jabari's father shifted from foot to foot, and the other man, who hadn't yet spoken, lifted his head to look directly in Issachar's eyes. "Jabari, what is this?" Jabari's father asked. It was Issachar who answered. "Sir," she said, "we are looking for our brother. Jabari and Gavi have brought us to find him." Jabari shot her a look. She narrowed her eyes at him. He cleared his throat. "These 3 are Poisonlanders," Jabari said. The woman with black skin gasped. Issachar noticed that she also had a circlet on her head. Jabari went on. "They followed an outcast," he said, his head up and his back very straight. "We led them through Maween so they could reunite with him in our city. I worried about taking Poisonlanders through our lands, but they," he swept a hand toward the Othra, "were very persuasive." He paused, watching the large birds as though leaving room for them to speak. But the Othra were silent, besides a quiet whirring and clicking that came from Emia. They looked at home in the large room, rather than out of place, and the jewel colors in their feathers flashed and changed continually. "But they don't look like Poisonlanders," the second woman said. Her white skin was a stark contrast to the black skin of the tall, silver-haired man who stood beside her. He held a long staff in his right hand. made from wood that looked like the silverwood trees beside Lake Io. He had the darkest skin Issachar had ever seen, with eyes that shone the reflective lights of the day-lit room. The woman who had spoken was breathtaking. She wore a long green robe embroidered with silver flowers, and she had flowers in her hair, which was flame-colored and fell to her waist. She shook her head. "But wait, they are tired. Come, children, sit. It seems you have walked a long way." The man with the staff guided them to a nook in one corner of the room. Low wooden platforms were covered with colorful cushions, and these had even more pillows piled on them. Servants emerged from behind the pillars and placed cups of water and plates of fruit on a low table in front of them. The soft-footed servants startled Issachar. She hadn't seen them before they moved. The cushions were soft, and as Issachar sank into a mound of pillows, she felt her weariness threaten to push her farther into the seat. She could sleep for a year. She pushed herself straight upright, willing herself awake. Once she found Gital, she could sleep, but it was essential to concentrate with her baby brother so close. Not far from the cushioned area, the Othra settled themselves on short pedestals and promptly went to sleep, tucking their heads under their wings. As everyone found a place to sit, the first woman spoke again. "Please introduce your friends, Jabari," she said. Her circlet was thin and delicate on her forehead. It looked like a silver thread against her dark skin. Her robe was a deep orange color, also covered in intricate silver embroidery. Everything was gorgeous. Issachar sank farther into the cushions. "Yes, mother, this is Issachar, this is Benim, and this little one is Iba," Jabari said, gesturing to each of them. Iba stood up and gave a deep bow, and everyone laughed. She sat down, flustered, but Jabari's mother smiled and beckoned to her, and she settled Iba closer to her side, holding her hand. "Welcome, young ones," said the man with the circlet. "We will have food, beds, and baths for you soon. But first, I'm afraid we must talk. I am Andar, regent and high elder of this land. You have met my sons, and this is my wife, Leilit, second elder. This is Ivram, third elder, and my advisor, and his wife, Kara, fourth elder, first of the rescued ones in Maween." Issachar stared at Kara, then remembered she was in a palace, and there must be some response called for. She bowed her head in greeting and felt Ben doing the same beside her. Then she took a moment to really look at the elders. Andar was perhaps an inch or two shorter than Jabari, but he was elegant and gracious, with glowing black skin and short, tightly curled black hair. He radiated authority. His wife, Leilit, was smaller than him, short only by Mawil standards. In the worker village, she would be considered a tall woman. She was the most beautiful woman Issachar had ever seen, her skin a rich brown with a high, curving forehead and large brown eyes. The lines of her face looked as though an artist had drawn them, and her hair coiled around her head like a crown. Leilit watched Issachar with a slight frown between her eyes, as though she was puzzled by something. The man with the staff was extremely tall, with dark skin, gray hair, and long limbs, and his wife, Kara, was tall like him. Her red hair was loose, flowing around her, but Issachar saw that pieces were braided into tiny plaits that shimmered with gold beads. Together, the four of them were impossibly beautiful. They shone in the room. Issachar tried to hide her dirty feet, jumping as Gavi elbowed her and winked. She gave him a small smile in return before she remembered that she was angry with him. "So," Andar said, "introductions are behind us. You followed your brother. We have never heard of this happening." "That's because it has never happened before, sir," said Ben. Andar sat back and looked at them. "But how did you come to live with the Poisonlanders?" he asked. Issachar sighed. So many questions when she simply wanted to know where her brother was. And Arya. She shoved back the tiny flame of hope with Arya's name on it. Issachar told the story of her mother in the desert quickly, then asked, "Do you know where our brother is?" She couldn't quite keep the impatience out of her voice, and she saw the man called Ivram smile. "Andar, the child is right. We have time for these questions later," he said. "Let's help these journeyers if we can. But young one," he said to Issachar, "we were just now conferring about a strange problem." He gestured toward the table and the papers scattered over it, which Issachar could now tell were maps. "The rescuers haven't returned, and we are wondering whether we should send someone for them. They should be back by now." A strange, choked sound came from Jabari. Issachar looked at him. It was the first time she had seen how fear looked on his strong face, and her stomach flipped with dread. She leapt to her feet, towering over everyone who remained seated. "What? What do you mean?" she cried. Gavi touched her leg. "Sit," he whispered, frowning toward the seated elders. Issachar sank onto her cushion, legs shaking, her face on fire, angry and embarrassed at whatever rule she had broken, despairing because she had believed she would hold Kital this very day. She had thought she would arrive in the city and simply open her arms up to Kital while he ran into them. Her hands shook, and she sat on them to make them stop. "What do you mean they're not back?" Jabari repeated, and Issachar felt worse when she heard the urgency in his voice. "We don't understand either," Andar said. "What could have held them up?" The elders gave each other troubled looks. "How many rescuers?" Gavi asked. "4," Ivram said. He heaved a deep sigh. "Ivy was with them." Gavi sat back with his head in his hands. "Who is Ivy?" Issachar whispered. "Our daughter," Kara answered. "Do you think—" Jabari started, his face creased in a frown. "Yes," his father said, before Jabari had even finished his question. "What? What?" Issachar asked, looking at the faces before her. It was cruelly ironic. They sat here with kind people and beautiful things, fruit sliced on a plate before them. But Issachar could not enjoy a single bit of it because of the fear that broke over her like a wave. Andar looked at her, his face serious. He had the same wide-set eyes and strong jaw that Jabari had, but when Issachar looked at Leilit, Jabari's mother, she could really see Jabari's face. Gavi, the former worker child, sitting beside his brother, didn't look like either of his parents, and Issachar briefly wondered what life was like for him as an adopted, rescued one. Andar spoke. "We have enemies we call the Sea People, for we don't know their name and they have never told us, preferring to stick to shadows and betrayal rather than declare themselves. Our neighbors and allies, the Hadem, have told us that recently the Sea People have been more powerful than usual. For every boat of Hadem that patrols the outer waters, there are 3 of the Sea Peoples, working to break into our lands and steal our children. The Hadem can usually hold them back, but lately they have been struggling. They brought us a report just last night." Issachar saw Jabari sit up straighter. "That they have seen signs of boats that have landed on our shores, but that the boats had been burned." Shock rippled through Issachar, and this time she had no words. She sat and waited for it to sink in. "What do they do with the children they steal?" Ben asked. Andar looked into the distance. It was Ivram who answered. "They sell them," he said. "Sometimes the Desert King takes them as slaves or sacrifices, or sends them overseas to the far continent." Issachar slumped in her seat, staring at the cup of water she still hadn't sipped from. A memory of her brother came into her head, unbidden. After she had forgotten to speak the sacred words at the gate one too many times, Nirloth had punished her. She was holding a cold cloth to her face when Kital, he couldn't have been more than 3, came to her and placed his hands gently on each side of her face. He looked into her eyes and sang the words she had sung to him ever since he was born, the same song Issachar's mother sang to her when she was alive. She remembered his gentle eyes and felt despair flood her. He was too small and vulnerable to survive slavery. "What do we do?" Ben asked, his hands clenched into fists. "We need to find them." "Do you know where the boats landed?" Gavi asked. His father nodded. "The Hadem elders showed us on the map yesterday." "Then let's go!" Issachar exclaimed. She sat forward, her hands on her knees. The Othra fluttered on their perches, then were still. "You must wait in the city, child," Leylit said, leaning forward, her eyes troubled. "We will send a group of rangers to find them." "Leylit," said Ivram, and the end of his staff glowed white. He closed his eyes and opened them again. "Forgive me. I believe they have a right to see their journey through. Issachar and Benihim will go with the rangers. The little one will stay here." Issachar saw a look of relief cross Iba's face before she frowned and looked like she would cry. Issachar could see telltale signs of exhaustion in her sister. She had walked a long way for a little girl, but Iba knew Kital better than any of them, and Issachar knew her sister's heart longed for Kital. "I would like the little one to stay with me," Leylit said. "Would you like that, darling?" Iba looked at her, then nodded. She blinked back tears and snuggled back into Leylit's arms, eating a slice of orange. Issachar didn't really like the idea of Iba staying with a stranger, but she could see that her little sister seemed born to be a princess. She met Gavi's eyes, and they looked quickly away from each other, stifling smiles. It was impossible to stay angry at Gavi. "We leave in the morning," Ivram said. "Get some rest." Andar looked sharply at the man with the staff. "You too, brother?" "I will go to search for my daughter," Ivram answered. Issachar wanted to protest that they should leave immediately, but she saw a steely look in Ivram's eyes and knew she was fortunate to be going at all. So she closed her mouth and crossed her arms, tucking her hands under her elbows. She finally leaned forward and drank the cold cup of water on the table, finishing it in one long swallow. Everyone stood, and Issachar saw Andar turn to Jabari. "Traveling with these young ones was without incident?" he asked quietly. "Oh, I wouldn't say that," Jabari said, glancing at Issachar. "Some Poisonlanders came deep into our lands to pursue the young Poisonlanders, and there were incidents." Heat blazed into Issachar's face, and she turned away. "Very well," Andar said. "You may give a full report later." Issachar had no doubt that Jabari would tell all her misdeeds when she wasn't around. She tried to shrug it off, but it bothered her. For some reason, she wanted the elders to think well of her. They bowed their way out of the room, Jabari and Gavi promising to come back to give their parents a full account of the trip later in the evening. Issachar turned on them as soon as they reached the hallway, her fists clenched. She wanted to punch them, but the door guards were watching, and she didn't know whether hitting an insufferable son of a regent was allowed in Azaria. "Why didn't you tell us you were brothers, or that your father was the regent?" she demanded. Jabari shook his head. "It doesn't matter in the outer reaches of the land. It only matters here, in the city." "Well, you could have told us, I don't know, when we were approaching the city. A little warning would have been nice." Jabari looked at her, his face frustrated. "Would you have walked in there with us if you had known?" She thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe." Actually, probably not. She would have expected trouble and might not have gone. The whole journey would have been different if she had known Gavi and Jabari were more than the young seekers they had claimed to be. "The Othra told me not to tell you, if you must know my reasons. They said you would equate my power with the power of the Poisonlanders, that you wouldn't know it for what it really is, and that you would be afraid." Issachar whirled to face the Othra, who had followed them out of the great room, but they were gone. Gavi shook his head and touched her on the arm. "You need to learn to trust, Issachar. Not everything is a battle." How can I trust when people don't tell me the truth? She asked, shaking with anger and exhaustion. She covered her face with her hands and took a deep breath, trying to understand. If anyone had been on her side, it was the Othra, but they had kept this from her. She reached out with a question inside her mind, and to her immense surprise, she felt a response from far away. She saw the perspective of the Othra as they circled the city, and she breathed in sharply as her gaze followed the city, nestled into a valley, one edge climbing a mountainside. The countryside spooled out to the east of the city. The mountain sheltered the buildings from the strong winds of the north. The deep comfort of Niril touched her heart gently, and she was so surprised that her anger evaporated in a moment. Ithaca had never seen through someone else's eyes before. She looked up at Jabari, stunned, and he took a step toward her, but just then a scuffle broke out at the palace doors. "Ibba!" Benaim called. "Where are you going?" Ithaca turned in time to see Ibba run through the vast doorway, leaping down the wide steps and into the street. Ithaca ran after her little sister. She had to watch her feet closely as she clattered down the unfamiliar stairs, but she looked up as she reached the bottom to see Ibba running after a cluster of kids. Ithaca chased her, stopping as Ibba paused, looking unsure. "I thought I saw Kital," she said. "You couldn't have," Ithaca said. "He's not here." The group of children turned to look at them. There in the center was a tall girl with a bow, hair woven in hundreds of tiny braids that clung to her head and cascaded over her shoulders. She wore a sky-blue sleeveless tunic over wide brown pants, and she had soft leather boots on her feet. But it was her face that stunned Ithaca. She looked exactly like Kital. She looked like Ithaca's mother. "Arya!" Ithaca breathed, and then the world spun. Jabari caught up to her and caught her as she fell. Her last thought before she lost consciousness was that this didn't mean she wasn't still mad at him.